Hi guys, here we are, this is Miss Levy, and we are in Unit 5, which is Chapter 10, and we are in Key Issue 4, and we're learning about the von Thunen model of agricultural land use. This is the main model in this unit, and so let's take a look at this information. So when we talk about the von Thunen model, and in von Thunen's model, he made two assumptions. That first they would consider land cost whenever trying to decide what plants or how to use their land and what to plant and what animals to domesticate, and then they would look at transportation costs. And in this, they would need to determine: do they use the land do they need extensive land use? Extensive means they need a lot of land, or is it intensive, meaning that they're going to be more strategic and work that land really hard. They're going to maximize the usage of that land. So extensive means that they need a lot of it, and intensive means they're going to maximize that usage. They're going to work that land hard. Then they need to factor in perishability. So this would be like milk and vegetables. Do they spoil? We have such a thing as the milk shed. The milk shed is how far away can it be transported before it spoils. It's called a milk shed. And that at the end of their equation, the crop must sell for more than the cost of the land plus the cost of production to make a profit. And in commercial farming, they want to make a profit. Remember, in commercial agriculture, the point is to sell off the farm. This is a business. So in a business, the point is to make a profit. So when we look at this idea of where is the most expensive land and why. So we know the most expensive land is right around the market or around the city center. That's because that's where the market is. So the most expensive land is right there next to the market, right next to the city center. And the farmer should not always plant a crop because it sells for the highest price, because it may not be using the land reasonably or responsibly, financially responsibly, because it may sell for the highest price, but it may be on the most expensive land, or it may have a higher transportation cost, which ultimately means they either don't make any money or they don't make as much money. Remember, when you're looking at how much money, you take the revenue, so how much they sell minus how much it costs, and that gives you your profit. And if you have your revenues, and if the costs are higher than the revenues or what you're selling it for, that means you lose money. If the revenues or what you're selling is equal to the cost, that means you just break even. If your revenues are higher than the cost, that means you make a profit. And so distance to the market is critical, but the cost of transporting the product is different for each. So when you look at where you're going to locate, closest to the market, you're going to want to use this land very intensively because it's the most expensive land. That means you want to maximize that usage. You're going to put on there the most perishable items and the most expensive products to transport. Furthest from the market, you're going to use this land. This is where you would want to have those farm types that require extensive land use, meaning that you need a lot of it. Therefore, this is where the least expensive land is because it's furthest from the marketplace. So you would want to put your least perishable products on, and those that are least expensive products to transport. And again, you should be taking notes, writing notes on this presentation. If I have it in mind, it's highly likely you're going to need to know this. So here we have our von Thunen model as he created it. And always at the center of this model is the city, and that is where the market is located. Let's take a look at some notes here. You can see these I have created myself. So when we look at the von Thunen model, this is obviously an agricultural land use model. And the question it tries to answer is, how do farmers decide how to use their farmland? This is what the purpose of this model is. Super important you understand the purpose. Again, von Thunen is an agricultural land use model, and it helps to explain how farmers decide how to use their farmland, given that they want to maximize their profit by minimizing costs. This is the purpose of every single business. A business owner doesn't just want to make money. A business owner wants to make the most money he can, meaning that he wants to maximize his profit by minimizing his costs. And that von Thunen, and remember, von Thunen, this is in the late 1800s, and this is in northern Germany. And he's a farmer, and he has a really large estate, and so he noticed that there were patterns in how land was being used for agriculture purposes. And so what the farmer produced varies by distance from the town or the market. That's the whole idea of this, that what they're going to produce, how they're going to use this land, it will vary, it'll differ by the distance from the town and the market. That the farmer's priority is to minimize two costs. Remember, to maximize profit, they must minimize their cost. And to him, the two main costs that needed to be minimized were the land costs and the transportation costs. So again, if they're going to, the priority is to minimize costs in order to maximize the profit. The two costs he says were most important are the land cost and the transportation costs. Let's take a look at what this really looks like. So here's the model, and you see at the center of the model is the city, and in the city is the market in the city center, and that the structure of this model is in a series of rings. We'll see this structure of rings come up again in Unit 7 in a different model, but this one is a series of rings. And at the center, again, you have your market, your city. The city center is where the market is located. And you have your 4 rings here. And in ring 1, you have your market gardening, fruit farming, and your dairying. Ring 2 is going to be forest and timber. Ring 3 is going to be extensive land use for grain farming. And in ring 4, you have ranching, grazing, so livestock ranching. And the whole purpose of this, again, is to minimize the costs. So he says you have 2 costs. You have your land cost and your transportation cost. So the land cost is always the most expensive right next to the city center. Think about in downtown Orlando. Why do they have skyscrapers down there? Because that's where the most expensive land is. So they build up rather than out. In any city, the most expensive land is right next to the city center. Again, that's still considered the marketplace. Say, agricultural land is the same. It is right next to the market is the most expensive land. So Unit 1, Ring 1 would be the where you would have the most expensive land. So you'll typically put your smallest farms here. The ones that are the least extensive land use would be right here in Ring 1. Ring 4, this is going to be your least expensive land because it's furthest from the city. This is where you would put your largest farms. So again, as you go out from the city center, so from the city center out, your land cost will decrease. So most expensive is here in 1, least expensive out here in 4. Meanwhile, obviously, as you get further away from your city, your transportation cost will increase. So again, your land cost, the most expensive is in 1. That's where you will have your smallest farms here. Your least expensive will be in ring 4. That's where you will need your largest farms, your most extensive land use. However, as you go from the city center out through ring 4, your transportation cost will increase. So as you go here in ring 1, this is where your transportation costs are the least. This is where you want to put the types of agriculture that are the most expensive to transport. So that's where because ring 1 is the least expensive overall, that's where you will put the product that is the most expensive to transport. That way you negate that increased cost. So again, because it's the most expensive to transport it, you want to put it in ring 1 where it's the least expensive overall cost. So again, it's the most expensive to transport. You want to put it in ring 1 where it's closest to the market, so it'll be less expensive. Then as you get further out in ring 4, you will put your least expensive to transport. So again, in ring 1, this is your farm that's the most expensive to transport. In ring 4, this is where you put your products that are the least expensive to transport. So let's really take a look at this. So in ring 1, we're going to put our market gardening, our fruit farming, which we call truck farming. And you'll see that it will literally be a truck like we saw on our crop walk. It'll be a truck, and you'll see them usually a flatbed, and they'll be selling out of boxes or crates. That's where they either take it to the market and they sell it directly. Like if you go to the farmer's market here in Winter Park on Saturdays, you'll see where people from different farms have loaded their products into trucks, and then they're selling them basically out of the backs of their trucks. That's called truck farming. Anytime you see that, where there are farmers and they have produce or vegetables or fruits, and they have them in crates or boxes, and they're unloading them out of the back of their truck, or they're selling from the back of their truck, that's also called truck farming. And they also have dairying in this as well, and that's because of the milk shed, because it's perishable. So because it's perishable, they have high transportation costs because they have to transport it so frequently. So they're going to put it on the most expensive land because they're going to use the least of it. Because whenever you look at dairying, it doesn't take up as much land. And if you look at market gardening, fruit farming, that takes up a lot less land because there's less demand for it. But it's more expensive overall because there is less of it. So you must use this land very intensively. So again, you're going to put this on the most expensive land because it's highly perishable. And so it's really expensive to transport because it needs to be done most frequently. Like milk, they used to have to deliver every single day. Well, you wouldn't want to put that out in ring 4. A, it'll spoil, and spoiled goods just end up costing money because you can't sell what's spoiled. Next is forest. Forest has a higher transportation cost because the logs are heavy, and that they have this ring because of they would need that timber for building, construction, and for fuel. So remember, transportation costs are determined by the weight of something, not volume. But by the weight. Whenever you think about going to the post office, the first thing they're going to do to determine how much it costs to send something is weigh it. So it's all, once you get out of ring 1, which is mainly about perishability, it's all about the weight in terms of the transportation cost, how to negate that increased cost, because as you further get away, you want to put the least expensive to transport because it's more expensive to transport out here. So 3 is extensive grain farming. It's less expensive to transport because you do it less often because it's seasonal. So over here with perishable, you're doing it every day. That's a lot more expensive to transport. But with grain, it's less perishable, so they can store it for a long time, so they don't have to transport it as often. In addition, they can transport it in bulk because it's typically harvested all at once. It can be transported in huge containers in bulk. So again, they need to be out here in ring 3 because they need a lot more land than forest does and a lot more than market gardening, fruit farming, and dairying, but they don't need as much land as ranching does and grazing does. And so they need to be out here at cheaper land because they need more of it. Finally, out here in ring 4, this is ranching and grazing. This is extensive land use. They need a lot of that land, so they need to be out here where it is cheapest. So in order to negate that increased cost, they go out where that land is the cheapest. Also, it's going to have the most expensive transportation cost because it's furthest from the city, so they put the products out there that are the least expensive to transport overall. And at this time in the history, the ranching and the grazing was the least expensive because they could just transport them by walking them right in there, cowboy style, like in a cattle drive. Literally, they would drive them right into the center of the city for slaughter. So let's look at an example. So in ring 3, you have a lower land cost than ring 2, but higher than ring 4. You have a lower transport